This is Lindy Kyzer with clearancejobs.com, and welcome to this episode of Security Clearance and Security on Federal News Network. Today, I'm thrilled to be talking with Noam Oz, defense acquisition expert and former director for innovation operations at NavalX, Office of Naval Research. I will never tire of how long these titles and positions can be, Noam, and the many ways that I can jack them up. But talking about innovation is a great topic for me. I feel like there's a lot of change happening in the federal government right now in the federal hiring and contract and acquisition marketplace. So I'm an eternal optimist. I like to choose to look at it in the positive. So excited to be joined by you and have your expertise with us today to share a little bit more about your experience and kind of what you see going on in the federal acquisition and innovation space going into the future. So thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to join you, and I share your affinity for optimism, even if it sometimes gets me laughed out of rooms.
Hey, I've been laughed out of most rooms, and if you saw the journey we got on to just even start this podcast today, you would surely know why. So, but again, thank you for being on the show. I want to talk about kind of stubborn bureaucratic and structural barriers. That's I've been in government for decades now. Sad to say, I can't pretend to be young anymore. And that's been a tale as old as time, right? I think there's a lot of momentum and push now to say, hey, well, let's do things differently, but it's not a new pushback or a new phenomenon. So kind of talk about your experience and how you've kind of busted through some of that bureaucratic or structural barriers in the past.
Sure. Yeah, I think in general, the the bureaucracy that I've encountered has fallen into one of two, or a combination of the two areas. At the forefront is the personality and the culture that uh, spans across most of at least the DoD, if not the entire government. Uh, a combination in that personality comprised of really an aversion to change, an aversion to risk or doing anything new, and in some cases, unfortunately, in too many cases, hubris, right? Believing that certain individuals that are in positions of decision authority can extend that authority beyond what's the scope of where uh, their authority lies, and making decisions for other entities in the stakeholder map. And when I say that specifically, when we have, at least in the DoD, when we are truly focused at our core on providing for the warfighter, and we remove the warfighter's voice from the conversation and start making decisions on their behalf without them involved in the discussion, I think that is an example of how we need to kind of get out of our own way and show a little bit more humility in recognizing that we don't have the full understanding, even in cases where individuals have worn the uniform but are years removed from wearing that uniform. The landscape, as you noted, has drastically changed, and it is continuing to change very quickly. The other area, I think, is just self-imposed procedures, and procedures that, so OSD tries to help all of the services, and that is a sometimes um, tense relationship. But at the same time, when Congress entrusts the DoD at large with certain authorities, and then each of the services interprets that legislation and policy into further restrictive procedures that are anchored in a CYA mentality, a risk averse mentality, I think that actually causes some detriment to the speed at which we could actually move, specifically in terms of acquisition.
Yeah. No, I love that you mentioned procedures because I'm a security clearance policy wonk, right? So a lot of times people are talking about policy, and then I hear about something that they're done and they're like, well, it's policy. And I'm like, show me the policy. No, it's procedure or process or
Right.
habit or institutional norm. Like that's not
Or
actually.
myth, right? Sometimes it's just a myth. People just assume that, okay, well, that sounds more conservative, so that must be right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and so I think there's so much that we could do even with the acquisition process if we actually looked back and said, "Hey, like what are we doing that's, where is the policy versus what are we doing that's just again baked in, yeah, our own." myth,
Yeah.
agency
Now,
myth.
with all that, I will say that over the past 3 years in particular, um, we've seen a lot more of the traditional minded individuals who were initially a bit dubious of all this disruptive innovation and innovation theater in many cases. Many more of them are coming into the fold, at least to participate in the discussion and explore the opportunity space more collaboratively. I'm happy to say that at my time at NavalX, we had a great team over at BM&T that supported us with the innovation operations line of business. And by embedding team members directly into the operator communities, we were able to very quickly identify where the opportunities for capability gains were, and then spin up the necessary teams to get after the friction points using this operator model that we came up with, and then translate those into not just novel tech, but novel tech that really made an impact and added value to the mission that was prescribed and to the capability needs that our warfighters have. And so we were able to, over the course of 9 months, actually deliver uh, three different novel dual use capabilities to three different operational commands, two of which went into theater, which I think is pretty outstanding when you consider that from an acquisition perspective, we typically plan 2 years out for funding and then on three fit up cycles. So, 3 5 year cycles. So, to get the money aligned and the stakeholders across the board aligned to execute on these three success stories inside of 9 months of execution year was pretty remarkable.
Yeah. No, and and there's certainly those examples of where the government has, previously been trying to do it right and move more in the right direction. There's certainly a lot of effort and at least, you know, I don't, I don't know, chatter right now about reforms to the government acquisition process, use of OTAs, more agility, especially in software acquisitions. I mean, like, do you see that in a step in the right direction? Is this a continuum of what's kind of already been started, or how significant are the proposed changes, or what's going on in that acquisition environment right now, in your opinion?
So, I should preface this response by saying I'm an innately impatient person. So, as quickly as it can move, it's not fast enough. Uh, I'm also one. I'm not going to wait. It's great. I commend the individuals that are really rolling up their sleeves at all levels and trying to instantiate positive acquisition reform. I'm not going to wait for that in order to start trying to deliver results. And so we've had OTA, the other transaction authority, we've had for several years now. Certain entities are leaning forward and exercising them. I think the biggest obstacle we face across the board is that we're not incentivizing it universally, that is, meaning we have this culture of risk aversion, not in every single pocket, but at large. And until we start building in those incentives for the behaviors that we want to see that are going to drive the results we want to see, we're not going to see a huge shift in that culture. So, at the tactical level, we could very simply build in to our performance evaluations that these other pathways need to be exercised. Now, the results may vary. So, until we get to a point where we are exercising them and it's a well oiled machine, I don't know how fair it is to hold someone accountable for a failed attempt, because that just regresses us right back into a risk averse mindset, right? We need to praise those who are leaning forward, willing to accept some upfront risk for the greater gains on the back end. And that needs to be methodical but discussed. There just needs to be that open door approach to it.
Yeah. And so kind of you talked about this a little bit, but like it's not just a single point of failure thing. I mean, if you're going to innovate, you need the developers, the warfighters, the contract specialists. What kind of incentives or shifts are required to like get all of those folks who typically probably operate in a siloed capacity to actually, interact and integrate together?
Yeah, sure. So I think from my perspective, it's a matter of I noted that one of the obstacles in the personality was the hubris. The response should be humility. So engaging with the stakeholders with humility and a true willingness to actively listen to their perspective. If we can go in with the mindset of trying to understand their equities, their incentives, their challenges and aversions, their sensitivities, and then rally around the opportunities for shared objectives, I think that's where we can bring people together for that Venn diagram where we can all agree we need to tackle those objectives, right? So, as an example, understanding that the program managers we have right now are held very strictly to performance metrics across cost, then schedule, and then performance. That's very different than the operational community where they need schedule, then performance, and then cost, right? The capability has to meet their hands at the pace of need for the mission that they are charged with pursuing, prosecuting, right? If we can't meet their schedule, we can celebrate however many programs of record we want, but they're irrelevant and they honestly waste taxpayer dollars. So when I was leading a team at NavalX, working with the BM&T folks, our prime drivers at the end, at the core of everything we were doing were what's the right move for the warfighter to support the warfighter, and how are we being judicious stewards of taxpayer dollars? Those two things continue to drive me regardless of which objective I go after. And I think if we can rally around that, especially with a sense of urgency, given that the Davidson window of 2027 is quickly approaching and that window is closing on us, we have to rally collaboratively. Having honest and candid conversations with a willingness to remain agile along the way and pivot as necessary went a long way for us. So I would regularly engage with operators, listen to them, check in with them. Is the team providing you what you need? And providing incremental updates to them so that it does two things for us. One, it informs them on the capabilities that are available to them and gives them incremental improvements in their quality of arsenal. But it also then provides immediate feedback to us on, do we stay the course with the requirements we laid out, or do we need to change them to be more relevant for the end user? I think that combination of conversations and then pulling in the acquisition community early, pulling in the resource sponsors early, the subject matter experts to inform what's technically viable, and just mapping out these stakeholders, understanding their respective objectives and equities, and then again, rallying around that pool of shared objectives goes a hell of a long way.
Yeah. Well, and I think, there's efforts like NavalX where that rapid prototyping efforts, the transformative innovation, doing things different is kind of what's expected there, right? But do you
Right.
think that the lessons that you learn there, how do they scale those out to like the broader acquisition, community? How do we take not just centers of innovation? Because I think there's some pushback right now, like on the centers of
Sure.
innovation kind of topic. And I think some of it is because we want to make sure that's not staying in that spot. How does it scale out? And were there examples of how you saw it, scaled out and affect the broader acquisition or innovation community?
I think too often the Department of Defense goes after capabilities with, right from the onset, this mentality that unless this transitions into a sustained program of record, it's a failure, or at least it's not a successful program. And we have DoD guidance that lays out a variety of different turnouts for pursuits. Some of them may be kick it back in for more maturity. Some of them may be a one off delivery to an operational community. Others may be, let's just go in a nominal quantity of these with no need for sustainment. Others may be a transition to a full on program of record with the support structure in place. I think if every pursuit is approached with the mindset of, hey, we need to lay a foundation for that sustainment tail and the operations and maintenance in mind, then, and we consider the logistics, the transfer, right, all of that, the security, then it provides us an opportunity to stay nimble as we proceed to determine which avenue do we need to pursue. That type of upfront homework also makes the conversation a lot more amenable to folks in the acquisition community who would otherwise be averse to great ideas with no back end support, and you guys haven't considered, is this even a viable partner to the DoD, right? One of the things that we really worked on and focused on was what we called capability readiness assessment. The community is generally familiar with technology readiness assessment, but that's in isolation for that one piece part. If we consider technology readiness embedded into the system of systems that will be used to perform and exercise that mission, then it gives us a different perspective on true technology readiness. If we consider company readiness, what's the foreign investment? What's the financial fortitude? What's the supply chain look like for this partner? So are they a fit for us as a true enduring relationship partner? And then ultimately the adoption readiness, looking at adoption from three different perspectives: the end user and how ready is the end user to adopt this capability into their existing toolkit, but also from the resource sponsor perspective and the program office perspective. How ready is the resource sponsor to build this into their POM cycle? And how ready is the program office to build this into as a piece part of their program of record or into their portfolio as a brand new program of record? If we consider all of that upfront and then lay a foundation, it really brings together that community from the R&D world through the acquisition sustainment world, all the while engaging regularly with the end user to inform how that path needs to proceed to add value with impact.
Yeah. So I love this is the perfect time what you just said, talking about supply chain, foreign investment, all of that. I mean, I think risk management posture, and obviously, I mean, security clearance and security is the subtitle here. Like those compliance topics are certainly big, and some of that pushback is when that demand for rapid innovation. But I get both sides of it, right? Like if you have, we have the capacity and capability if there is an innovative tool or solution that we think can serve our community and our warfighter, it wherever it's being produced, we certainly want that. But how do you balance that demand to, again, for you know, rapid innovation acquisition with risk management?
I think it goes back to, I try to keep things simple just because I'm not a very sophisticated individual. So I have certain things that guide me, right? Certain guidelines. And one of those is understanding those equities, incentives, sensitivities, aversions, and opportunities. I'll give you an example. When I was with the Navy's Unmanned Task Force, we knew that we needed to go after, for a certain operational community, we needed to go after small USVs. We had down selected to one viable candidate, and we needed to apply funds to it. The Unmanned Task Force didn't have direct funding or acquisition authority at the time. And so it was really a matter of tapping into the network. I reached out to PMS 406, which is the Unmanned Program Office for the Navy, and had a discussion with them to understand where are they with their programs of record for uncrewed vessels and what are some of the concerns they have looking forward. And we had agreed that, the integration of an autonomy baseline that we needed to fund for this small USV venture was the same baseline that they would need to integrate down the road when their platform was built for a large uncrewed surface vessel. And so you have access to some R&D dollars. Let's apply those, accelerate them and apply them in execution year in order to vet out the autonomy baseline now. It meets our schedule to get that small USV out to the operational command, and it buys down programmatic risk for the program office and PMS 406 when they go to integrate this baseline on their programs of record down the road. So it's really having that open dialogue and understanding where are those shared opportunities to buy down risk, right? In the R&D world, we're much more ready to assume risk because we can also stay nimble with the requirements. But if the program offices are open to collaborate between R&D and procurement and assume the risk up front in the R&D arena, if exercised properly with the operator involved in the loop, it really offers an opportunity to buy down risk while getting sets and reps in on those capabilities in the R&D space to inform what those requirements should be when we transition over to a program of record.
Yeah. No, and I think, it's an interesting time right now. There's a lot of change happening. I think there's some pushback on these, centers of excellence, centers of innovation. again, I'm clearance job, so I always have to talk a little bit about, careers, and certainly from your career background, what advice or feedback would you give to folks who are looking to push or pursue innovation in the federal government, wherever that is? Like, how do you be an innovation agent regardless of where you're sitting, or what your direct role or responsibility is?
I think it's understanding what your identity is coming into the market. So, are you a dual use application provider? Are you strictly focused on defense? Why are you doing it? Right? If we can get at the core driver for why this entity wants to enter into an overly bureaucratic system that in many cases has lower margins than the commercial sector, right? There must be some core driver there. And if you can use that to catapult yourself into the room to have these discussions, and then understood, we're going to get to the conversation about your capabilities, but what sets you apart is going to be actively listening to what the needs are and coming in with an informed position on what the operator's needs are. And if we can all rally around that operator and then figure out, come in with a mindset of, it's not a matter of why we can't go after it, but here are the avenues that we can explore. So I've been uh, very pleasantly surprised to see how many in the private sector are getting so familiar with the executive orders, with the various pathways that are available, whether they be commercial solution openings, the cyber avenues, the prize challenges that can lead to production contracts on OTAs, even work with others such as InQtel, who can help facilitate these work programs that can then transition into programs of record. But understand the battle space in a way, and then engage from a position of a dialogue and building an enduring relationship as opposed to just coming in for that transaction.
Yeah. I love that. I think, Department of Defense, federal government writ large, they need strong, enduring partners, right? So if you're just coming in for the one time, the one and done opportunity, I think the federal acquisition process should scare you away, quite frankly. So,
Right.
but hey, there's good folks, there's good innovators, they're experts like Noam Oz. So I appreciate your taking the time to chat with me today and to be on the show. Again, Eternal Optimists Unite. I think if you have a solution that you want to pursue into the federal government, I would look to now as an opportunity time and not a time to turn away. So thank you again for being on the show.
Thank you, Lindy.